poses any question for us as a country, the answer is not to fuel his publicity by banning him.
All these people from some board just decide to go ahead and troll the entire country.
The answer is to rebut his arguments. I'll finish my point then. The answer is to challenge.
They're having a really good debate too, but nah.
About why he is wrong about the contribution of American and British Muslims to this.
This project crash.
The honourable member cites 14 cases of people who were banned. Has the honourable member considered the 84 hate?
At the very, one might say politically correct, although I don't want to use that term, but the very sanitized version of American history and politics that we've heard today. And in that light, Donald J. Trump's objectionable, hateful views have a history in the American political arena. They're not unusual. They're not something that's he dreamt out from his own head. They come in a long line of nativist legislation. Now, we can object to this, we can decry this, we can say it's terrible and evil and bad, but that is no grounds on which to ban a presidential candidate. He would even say, he would suggest that his ban was a temporary ban. That's what he said in his speech in South Carolina. You will note that the Chinese Exclusion Act was not a temporary ban. It lasted for 60 years. The Immigration Acts of 1924 were not a temporary ban on Asians and Arabs. They lasted for 30 years. So his form of nativism is something which I'm afraid to say, and Martin Luther King would, I'm sure, agree with me, is something which the history of the United States, regrettably, is full of. And so Donald Trump is in a long tradition, but that doesn't mean we should ban him. And all the arguments that have been made against the ban, I think, are absolutely valid. And I will say this, no one has said it, but I will say it in this debate. If the United Kingdom were to ban Donald J. Trump from coming into Britain, that would be the biggest boost for his campaign in America that we could possibly give. Absolutely. In terms of publicity, in terms of the patriotism of the United States, not wishing other countries to impose upon them to try and shape and determine the outcome of their elections. This would be a spectacular own goal. I remember the Guardian attempt in 2004 to stop George Bush from becoming re-elected, from being re-elected in that campaign. And I think a very misguided Guardian journalist, and I mean no slur on that paper, but they had a writing campaign, a letter campaign to the people in Ohio. They'd identified that Ohio was a key swing state, and they got some of their readers to write to individual electors in that state, urging them not to vote for George W. Bush. Needless to say, I'm sure members of the House will not be surprised to learn that George W. Bush carried Ohio and was indeed re-elected as President of the United States. That campaign was often cited as a way in which foreigners, people trying to intervene in the election of another state, could get things completely wrong. And the same thing, I'm very happy to give way.
Thank you. Thank you. Very generous of you to give way. I'm very grateful. Does the honourable member not see the difference in the discussion? We are not seeking at all to influence what happens in the American presidential candidates' elections or elections to follow. We're talking about what we can do here. We're talking about asking the Home Secretary to be consistent in her approach she's used and rules she's used in relation to 84 other preachers, that those same rules be applied to Donald Trump in this country. We're talking about the United Kingdom, not anywhere else.
I fully appreciate the Honourable Lady's remarks. And as far as she is concerned, in her own mind, that is the case. But I'm asking her to consider what the people of America would, how would they interpret the ban? How would they don't have the luxury of having her sort of lucidity and understanding how our conventions and debates work. The headline, I'm very happy to give away.
I thank the Honourable Member because you make my point for me. It's all very well to say that let Donald Trump come here and have the discussion with us. He wishes to ban people like me and the lucidity to which you refer to going to the United States of America to make the case for the Muslims of this country who want to live in peace and harmony, who are not represented by Daesh. That is the point, and I thank Honourable Jen for giving way and allowing me to make that.
I fully appreciate her remark, but as other people have observed, the answer to his ban is not to ban him. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I'll explain very briefly. He is banning Muslims. In his own mind, he's saying that Muslims constitute a danger to the United States. That's what he thinks. And on those grounds, he is banning them. Now, we are doing the same thing if we were to ban him. We are saying that Donald Trump represents a danger to the United Kingdom, and on that ground, we are banning him from coming. The implied logic is exactly the same. The circumstances are different, but the logical thought is exactly the same. I'm quite happy to give way.
I thoroughly disagree with the honourable member on saying that it's exactly the same. It is not exactly the same. Donald Trump has said he wants to ban all Muslims because of their religion. That's 1.6 billion people he wants to ban because of their religion. The reason why the members on this, or some members, are asking for him to be banned is because of the rhetoric and the sentiment and the values that he's expressed. That is different from banning someone because of their religion. I hope that point is clear to another member who made the same point.
I've been very generous in my interventions, but I want to clarify that point. I don't have much time. But as I repeat, the grounds upon which he is banning Muslims isn't because of their faith. It is because he believes that they constitute a danger to the United States. That is the ground, all of that. I mean, I'm just explaining his logic. I don't agree with it. And I'm saying that any case to ban Donald Trump would be on the basis that he is a danger to our civic safety.
Very briefly.
Logically, it is exactly the same.
Very briefly. On that point about 1.6 billion Muslims, thank God there are 1.6 billion Trumps.
Yes, yeah, it would make our lives, I think it will make our lives very, very difficult. But lastly, what I would say in conclusion, it's been a very engaging, very enlightening debate. But what I would say is, beyond the immense publicity, and it's no good to say that, oh, he's got a huge publicity at the moment, so any more wouldn't make any difference. We've seen throughout his campaign, he was well known at the beginning of his campaign, but we've seen that there's been a growing crescendo of excitement, of interest in the campaign. The very fact of this debate, as someone else observed, is generating and stoking that excitement. I'm not going to take any more interventions. I can see the lady itching in her seat, but I will resist that temptation. But what I'm saying is that we are simply adding fuel to this whole media circus, and this is playing exactly into his hands. And a ban, if it were, would be a headline throughout the world. It would simply reignite all the publicity that he generated with his outrageous policy, and would exacerbate the situation, would make it more likely that he would be the eventual victor in the Republican nomination fight, and may well, who knows, win the election in November. And then we would be in this absurd situation, Mr. Chairman, in which we would have banned the President of the United States from coming to Britain, which is insane. It's an insane situation to be in. And people who say that he has no chance of becoming president, this is my final point. Look at the odds on Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition. Oh, I know. I think someone in Essex, I'm not sure whether it was in your constituency, Mr. Chairman, made £2,000, having put £10 on him at 200 to 1. And I can assure you, as of today, the chances of Donald Trump becoming president are far greater than 200 to 1.
Yeah. Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you, Sir David. I think the question for the Home Secretary is this: is Donald Trump conducive to the public good? And I think we've had a lot of talk in this debate about buffoonery, terms like blunt directness. I would say that if I were Muslim, and I'm not, I speak as a gentle atheist, I would find that repulsive. The thought that I should be excluded from the United States of America for no other reason than that I was a Muslim. I'm proud to represent Dartmouth. And from Dartmouth, nearly 400 years ago, the Pilgrim Fathers sailed to the Americas. And they sailed to escape from the kind of religious persecution that we're addressing today. And because we've seen the results in Europe of what happens when you demonize an entire people for no other reason from their race. So I don't think that we should trivialize this discussion. I think it's a really important debate. Nor do I think that the result of the US presidential election will be decided on whether or not we in this House or whether the Home Secretary decides to exclude Donald Trump. In fact, I would argue that should Donald Trump be excluded from one of the US's oldest allies, that would send a very clear message to the people of the United States about what we feel about those who demonize an entire people for no reason other than their religion. That said, I don't think there is any realistic prospect that the Home Secretary will ban Donald Trump. But let's, as this House, send a very clear message to Muslims in this country, to British Muslims, that we value you, that we value your contribution, that we will take this petition very seriously, and that perhaps those arguments about religious freedom matter as much now as they did 400 years ago. And I welcome everybody across the pond in the United States who may be following this debate back to my constituency, the most beautiful constituency in Britain, to come and see where the Pilgrim Fathers sailed from Dartmouth. And the anniversary is in 2020. But I'd say to them all, and I'd say to Donald Trump, just reflect on the consequences of your kind of religious bigotry. This is not a laughing matter. Think again, and if you do visit this country, take time to visit the mosques. Take time to meet Muslims. Take time to understand just how profoundly offensive and dangerous that kind of thinking is. And there is no place for it in this country or in the United States.
Thank you, Sir David. 25 years ago, I was in New York City, and out of some sort of mawkish interest, perhaps in his notoriety, I visited, I actually did two things related to Mr. Trump. I visited the Trump Tower, which is a sort of a black and gold edifice to a certain sort of narcissism, and I read his book, The Art of the Deal, which I have to say was pretty similar in many ways. And, you know, these things weren't very edifying, and his activities since haven't got any more edifying, I would say. We have in this country, though, a long history of civilizing tolerance, developed out of conflict, deliberation, and progress. This place, Westminster Hall, is a place of particular resonance in that history, where overbearing attitudes have been brought into line with the thinking of the day, sometimes with force, even when held by the most powerful. King Charles I was sentenced to death just a few yards from this place. MPs here represent their constituents by leave of those who send them, and the sensible ones keep close to mind the summary nature of the decisions of the public opinion which can end it. Those from whom the public withdraws their support have somewhat better prospects than in the past, happily. No longer do political disagreements lead to duels, disembowelment, or decapitation. There is a settled and more civilized system of elections, debates, votes, and law courts to govern us, and for this we must all be grateful. So when a terrorist menace threatens our hard-won civilization with a throwback to barbaric and outdated methods of dealing with difference and brings them to our shores, it is right that we should oppose it in the strongest terms. Our American cousins feel no differently. They are conscious of freedom, born of escape from religious intolerance, as we just heard, a need to be self-reliant, and a desire to make their own economic destiny, and their own strong democratic and legal institutions have been forged out of traumatic disagreement too. When they speak, we should listen, even if we disagree, and we should be robust with them where necessary, and encourage them not to take retrograde steps. And so back to Mr. Trump, the Donald, the orange prince of American self-publicity. More public now than usual because he will be running for president if he wins the nomination as Republican candidate, and possibly be close to the presidency should Bernie Sanders and not Hillary Clinton be selected as the Democrat candidate. He has said things which many of us would not, and the addition of celebrity has been somewhat grotesque. To say he would ban Muslims from entering America was too simplistic, unhelpful, and wrong. But I don't think there is evidence he does not believe in democracy itself. So talk of fascism is, to this point, a bit overblown, notwithstanding his bedtime reading might have left quite a lot to be desired, as we heard earlier. While cynically expressed and exploited by Mr. Trump, people's concerns about the terrorist challenge do need to be addressed. However, we need to work positively with Muslim communities, not demonize them. Where better for Mr. Trump's spurious opinions and characterizations to be debated and debunked than here in the UK, the crucible of modern democracy, in which heads are no longer lost for dissent. Who would not want to watch him pricked, poked and prodded on, have I got news for you? So let him come. Bad opinions and characters have been allowed in Britain before, not a few of them homegrown, and we would not want to allow him any victimhood with which further to hoodwink people. I hope that honest British Muslims would have their say, and even more people would then decide not to vote for him and to use their good sense. Less seriously, who knows? Up close, we might also get to see just what is under that hair.
Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Sir David. This petition, with over 500,000 signatures, is a welcome indication of the scale of revulsion with which we in these islands treat the xenophobia of Donald Trump. Now, I'm here to sum up for the SNP, although I doubt many parties have an actual policy on Donald Trump. Thankfully, it's not been needed until necessary. And whilst I don't necessarily support a complete ban on Mr. Trump from entry into this country, it's clear that his bigoted remarks against Muslims, against Mexicans, and against other minorities, but particularly his remarks about Muslims, deserve the utmost condemnation from all sides of this House and all parts of society. So can I say at this point that I am proud of the petitioners and all of those who signed this petition for rejecting the outrageous xenophobia and Islamophobia of this man. And I hope they won't take to heart too much the ticking off that they've had from some people on those benches for daring to raise this subject. And there have been arguments, some interesting arguments on both sides of the debate today. Those who are against banning but oppose Donald Trump and everything that he stands for have talked of bringing him here to educate him. And I didn't really I didn't have the same understanding as I think other honourable members have had of what they meant by that when they said, I'd like to invite him to my constituency and take him to the mosque to meet some Muslims. They thought perhaps maybe those people would teach him a thing or two, and they would be absolutely right to do that. The other argument, the strongest argument I feel in favour of banning him is simply the argument of equality. And I think the Minister needs to answer, is it correct when other members say that there are other cases very similar that are treated extremely differently? I think that's something he has to answer. And indeed, I think the very fact that this petition was so popular highlights three worthy and important points. The first is that we in these islands reject wholeheartedly the notion of discriminating against anyone on the basis of their religion. The second is that it points out that individuals of power such as Trump are happy to demonise others, but would never consider that they themselves could be treated in such a fashion. And thirdly, the public revulsion in this country and in the United States, because let's not forget, there was an outcry in the United States from the many good people in that country to the statements of this public figure highlights the fact that Trump's statement goes against all of the shared Enlightenment values that ties the states and the countries of the United Kingdom together. And whilst we can recognise that his statements were distasteful, we should also note the hypocrisy of this son of an immigrant, of a religious minority, advocating the being so bigoted against other migrants and religious minorities. Donald... Well, okay. Very briefly.
Very briefly. I'm afraid this debate actually in America is far more nuanced than what she says. All the Republican candidates in this election are expressing a traditional American view that America is a melting pot. It doesn't matter where you come from, but you have to be loyal to the flag, and you have to be loyal to America. And there is this feeling in America. Now, Trump may be articulating this in a particularly controversial and extreme way, but for us to deny that many people in America are worried about their Americanness is to deny the real debate that's going on in America, which is a valid debate.
Order. Just before the Honourable Lady resumes her speech, just to say we are not so tight for time as we thought about 10 minutes ago. The debate can continue until 7:30. Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you very much, Sir David. And I would just say to the honourable member there that he talks about Republican politicians, but there are other politicians, there are other activists in the United States of America who don't agree with what his assessment of the situation. I want to look at Donald Trump, the man, the boy. As his first name suggests, he is the son of a Scottish immigrant, and I apologise for that. Like countless others, his mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, left her homeland during the Great Depression and went to what was, after all, the land of liberty. This desire for economic opportunity is the same thing that motivates many migrants to go to America today. The Mexican migrants who Trump so roundly defamed are engaged in the same quest that his forebears undertook. As a man who purports to be proud of his New York heritage, Trump would do well to look to Lady Liberty for some advice on immigration. Of course, we would also do well to remind Donald Trump, as the son of a Scottish Presbyterian, of the countless generations of immigrants who left these shores and went to the US in search of religious toleration. The Puritans may have got a shock and landed on Plymouth Rock, but they certainly did go on to forge a society where your religion was, to a greater or lesser extent, irrelevant in public life. So whilst trailblazers like Al Smith and John F. Kennedy still faced anti-Catholic prejudice when they ran for office, they were always able to fall back on the fundamental truth that religious bigotry goes against all of the Enlightenment values that America shares with Europe. It is easy for those of us protected by this parliamentary bubble to consider proposals and rhetoric such as Trump's as being distasteful, opportunistic. Some people thought it was funny and crude. But all of us in public life have a duty to work for the common good and to oppose discrimination. And I don't think anyone in here would disagree with that. Yep.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. The Honourable Member said earlier on in her speech that she hoped that the Home Secretary would consider whether this case was any different from the others that were raised. Does the Honourable Member not think that this case is considerably different from the other cases, in that this is a presidential candidate? And if a presidential candidate was banned and became president, then in those circumstances, then the ability to forge links and discuss policy on a whole range of issues would be extremely difficult.
Well, that is why I'm summing up and I'm giving, I think, both sides of the argument. I'm just maybe a bit more vociferous in my opposition to Donald Trump, the person. I do understand that. I understand that argument. But the way that I see it being different because he's a presidential candidate is that he should be less likely to get away with these things because he has far more influence over many more people. When you have someone of... Yes, honourable friend.
Thank you, Sir David. But surely the point is that Donald Trump wants to ban parliamentarians from this parliament entering America, so he should know better if he's a presidential candidate.
I completely agree with that. He should know better. And it kind of, made me smile to myself when I heard arguments from members opposite saying that we should not be interfering in anybody's chances in the political processes, and yet we have MPs in this parliament that he would stop from visiting his country. When you have someone of his prominence running for the most powerful political position on this planet, actively encouraging discrimination as state policy, that divides communities. It can't do anything else. That example leads to countless acts of low-level bigotry and hatred, which will never be reported. But I want to turn to some of those examples which have been reported, and the rise, not just down to what Donald Trump said, but his like, in Islamophobia. A friend of mine who is an SNP councillor in Glasgow talked after the Paris attacks of his son being afraid to walk to school because he was seeing the headlines on the front pages of newspapers, and one in particular claiming that a significant percentage, and I think it might even have said a majority of Muslims supported terrorism. That child was frightened to go to school. And when some Muslim children are going to school, they're being called terrorists and bombers. They have absolutely no connection to any of the terrorist activities that are going on. Today, David Cameron announced funding to assist in English language lessons. Now, I agree we should be supporting people to integrate. We should be supporting people, not forcing people. But my understanding is that this funding is for Muslim women. Well, what has religion got to do with the English language? And how will that work? Will people, Muslim women, be routinely tested to see if their English language skills are up to speed? Has my honourable friend beside me already passed that test, or does she have to take a test in English? It's ridiculous. And if he did indeed say that the money was for Muslim women, not women who don't speak English, but Muslim women, and that's not just how some of the press interpreted it, then that is wrong and in itself will assist Islamophobia. Now, I'm sure it's not deliberate. We all remember that language is so important, and we all would do well to mind the language that we use. But Donald Trump, it wasn't just the language that he used, it was the intent behind a prepared statement. Now, in pre-war Europe, the Jews were forcibly registered. Donald Trump called for Muslims not to be banned from coming into the country, but to be registered and to be tracked. And to my mind, there is no difference between that and what they did to the Jews in pre-war Europe. And that leads me on to a number of questions that I have for the Minister. Firstly, does he agree with his colleagues, some of his colleagues, that the impact of Donald Trump saying what he did is no greater and no more dangerous than their constituents saying it to each other? Secondly, is he comfortable that somebody like Donald Trump will automatically be allowed to come into this country when I know several people who cannot get their wives or their husbands into the country even for a visit? And I see he's shaking his head, but are they not as deserving of the right to visit this country? If he is allowed to be allowed into the country, will the Immigration Minister be expecting Donald Trump to retract what he said before he comes in here? And another question, if the President of China had called for all Christians to refuse entry to China, would he still have been invited to this country last year? Or would we have been saying, oh, but he's the President, because so many have said, oh, but he might be the President. I will when I finish my sentence. He's the President, or he's got the right to offend. Oh, but lots of my constituents think like that. Would he get the same treatment that Donald Trump is getting from this government?
Very pleased. On that very point about banning heads of state, it's widely known that Mecca has been banned for Christians for hundreds of years, yet we entertain and have entertained the King of Saudi Arabia. Indeed, Mecca and Medina are banned, prescribed for Christians.
I would just say that there are a number of other people that I'm not comfortable that they are cozying up to the UK government's cozying up to them for a number of other reasons, Saudi Arabia being amongst them. Does the Minister agree with me? I'm not expecting that the Minister's writing all these down and is going to answer them all, but I live in hope. Does he agree with me that my honourable friend, the member for Oakhill and South Perthshire, always gives top-rate, passionate speeches about her personal commitment to equality for all? And is it acceptable for us to welcome in the man who would stop my honourable friend and her children from entering the United States? And finally, my final question, that is, not my final statement, will the Minister join me in condemning the nasty, abusive, racist tweets that my honourable friend has sat here receiving on account of her daring to speak out against Donald Trump? And does he think Donald Trump's statement, his anti-Muslim statement, may have contributed to the abuse that she is constantly having to put up with? I've completely lost my place now, but no, I haven't. So Donald Trump is on the record as saying that His second favourite book after the Bible is The Art of the Deal, written by one Donald J. Trump. Perhaps it would be beneficial if he spent more time reading the Constitution of the United States, because, as President Obama's press secretary pointed out, I certainly will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making a very good speech in actual fact. But on the point about the Constitution of the United States, Donald Trump has actually suggested that Cruz can't stand for the presidency either. I wonder, Cruz, who's the other Republican candidate, in the election race. So it shows it's not just in a way confined to Muslims, but it's confined to other people. So the man's whole attitude is questionable, and where his direction is going politically. But more importantly, where is the Republican Party going, putting two candidates up like that one is as bad as the other?
That's absolutely, I agree with that, and it is a matter for that political party, but it's a very good point to raise, and maybe a very good reason for us all to be supporting Hillary Clinton to become the next President of the United States. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I'm not allowed to comment on the presidential elections. But as I was about to say, as President Obama's press secretary pointed out, Donald Trump's statements make him unfit to be president, because he cannot pledge to uphold the Constitution of the United States if he doesn't believe in religious liberty and freedom from discrimination. Or is he going to amend the Constitution on his own? And how would the people of the United States put up with that? And whilst Trump's right-wing rhetoric might help him pick up votes in the primary, in the general election, the vast majority of voters in the States will no doubt be horrified that such an individual could lead them on the world stage. Trump believes himself to be plain-spoken, but I don't believe that appealing to... And I understand some of the arguments around people don't want robotic politicians who just churn out pre-rehearsed press statements. But there is a huge difference between that and what we've got here. And I don't believe that appealing to fears and prejudice is a language and common sense of people either here or in the United States. It is tempting to give Trump a taste of his own medicine. It's very tempting to bar him. Would he love it? Would we be giving a gift to him? Would, as some people have argued, just give him even more publicity? Or is the argument stronger that if we let him in, we will give him publicity, because having said what he said and caused such controversy, he'll be on every TV programme and every chat show in the land spouting his nonsense. Although I do see an argument for allowing him to come in and do that, because I do believe that he won't be able to help himself, and he will say things that will render him chargeable and guilty or able to be prosecuted for inciting racial hatred. Finally, he's not a murderer. I'm just going to respond to that comment that was he's not a murderer, but surely the argument can't be that we only want to ban murderers, we only want to jail or charge murderers. There are other crimes, and it is a crime, and it's a crime that has a real impact on people's lives. Maybe not my life, but it has a real impact on many people's lives. Finally, Sir David, there have been suggestions, many suggestions on that side, that we should keep quiet about this. In fact, members of the public who signed the petition, and some of them are here today, that they should just keep quiet. So I'm going to end by letting everyone know that I have an EDM marking today, which is Martin Luther King Day. In fact, the 30th anniversary of Martin Luther King Day, and encouraging everyone to sign that EDM if you've not already. And I'm going to quote Martin Luther King, who said, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. We won't be silenced."
Here's Stop.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sir David. I, like many others here, welcome this debate, and it's a good thing that 600,000 or so members of the public, one way or the other, have brought this to the attention of the House. There are clearly a wide range of views amongst the public, across all the political parties and across the House itself. And there have been powerful speeches and powerful interventions. But in one important aspect, I think in all of the speeches this afternoon, we are united in condemning the comments of Donald Trump on issues such as Mexican immigrants, Muslims and women. And we should celebrate that, whatever view we take of the proposals in the petitions before us. And I'd like to take this opportunity to add my name to the list of those condemning the comments that have been made. Before turning to the specific question of whether Donald Trump should be banned from entry to the UK, I wanted just to spend a few moments on a wider context, because Donald Trump made his comments about Muslims largely in the aftermath of the San Bernardino shootings on the 2nd of December. That's when he was at his height in relation to those comments. Now, he's not the first, and he won't be the last, to make comments about a community in the wake of a terrorist atrocity. And that gives us the opportunity, I think, this afternoon, just to be absolutely clear that responsibility for terrorist acts lie with terrorists, not with the communities that they purport to come from. And we must be clear what we say about that, even where he is not clear about what he says. And that does give me the opportunity to bring to this debate concern about the rise in hate crime here in the UK. Hate crime has been increasing, as has been mentioned in this debate. It's gone up 18% in 2015. And the number of offences involving religious hatred has more than doubled over the past 3 years. That rise is a concern, but it's not uniform. It always spikes after an atrocity. There's always a reaction in terms of hate crime. And just last month, in my constituency of Holborn and St Pancras, I had convened a meeting with Bengali and Somali women that I was particularly concerned to hear from. And we spent the afternoon discussing their concerns. And this was in December, after the Paris atrocities. And the one thing they raised with me over and over again was that they, the women in my constituency, Muslim women in my constituency, were very concerned that they were being insulted that day, that week, as a result of what had happened in Paris. And they perceived it and they felt it. And they said it was happening in Euston, on the buses, on the trains, when they were shopping, etc. That is happening in our communities, and it does spike after atrocities. And we have to unite about our values and our concern that that should be dealt with. Now, I know that the government is now tracking Muslim hate crime as an independent category, and that's welcome. And I know there are a number of steps being taken to deal with hate crime. And anything the Minister can say to point out what in addition is being done to tackle this kind of hate crime, I think would be welcome. But I do join with other comments when saying that I too, and many people here, will want to send a message to the Muslim community about how much we value them and what they bring to our societies. Of course.
Yeah.
That's been our question.
On that point, and I'm extremely grateful to Honourable Member for giving way and the sentiments he makes in terms of talking about the Muslim community. Can I also say to Honourable Member, and I think it's important to put on record, that the Muslim community condemns all type of bigotry, racism, no, regardless of who is spouting that. There seems to be a misconception, not least that's happened throughout this debate, and I refer to comments that I've received during it, that for some reason we think it's acceptable for Muslims to speak in derogatory terms about people of other religions. I think it's very important that we put on record that that is absolutely not the case. Wherever the bigotry, racism, hate speech is coming from, it is not acceptable, regardless of who might be delivering the message.
Well, I'm very grateful for that intervention, because I do want to just say a few comments about part of the debate this afternoon about this simplistic approach that says, well, because he wants to ban Muslims, we shouldn't ban him. It is far too simplistic. What lies at the heart of his belief that Muslims should be banned is that he thinks they're all dangerous. That's not buffoonery. That is absolutely repugnant. That is not what leads anybody in this debate, anybody who signed that petition, to suggest that Donald Trump shouldn't come here. It's a very different situation, and that is why his comments are so offensive to that whole community, and of course to women and to Mexicans as well. It's because of the assumptions and the belief that lies behind them. They are, of course.
I don't in any way condone what Donald Trump said, but I don't think it's right in fair dealing to say that if you ban all of X, that means you think that all of X are dangerous, all of whatever group it might be. What you're saying, what you're saying, forgive me, but what you're saying is that a very few from a certain group might be dangerous. And that's where the ban is coming from. I don't condone the logic. I don't condone the policy. But I think in this House of Commons, we have to give fair dealing to the views that have been expressed.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I think we have to be very careful about equating the views of people in this House, members of this House, who call for a ban, and the views of Donald Trump. And I'm afraid, for my part, they do edge towards treating a whole community as a suspect community. It may be, of course, that he doesn't think each and every member of the community, but this has happened before in history, many other contexts, where a whole community has been treated as a suspect community, and we've stood against it in the past, and we should stand against it now. Now, one measures, of course, yes, of course.
For giving way. And he comes to this debate with considerable learned and legal experience. Isn't this debate can be tied up in whether Mr. Trump's comments were, as have been described, outrageous comments, or simply, as some of us believe, hate speech? And as his colleague from Birmingham pointed out, there are others who have been banned from this country for saying exactly the same things.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I will come to that, if I may, in just a moment. I am going to deal with that specific issue. Obviously, one of the measures available to the government is to ban any individual for entry to the UK, and that is a power that's been used by successive Home Secretaries on a number of occasions, and many of the examples have been put before the House this afternoon. It is a power that should be applied equally to everybody, whatever their wealth or power, and I think that is important. And I don't hold the view that because someone is a presidential candidate, that gives them any special category. They should be put in the same as everybody on the basis of what they've actually said or done. Of course.
Sarah Woods. Does the honourable gentleman agree, however, that the consequences of this kind of hate speech are greater when they come from high-profile individuals? And as I say, the heart of this debate is whether or not Donald Trump's UK is conducive to the public good. And we've heard repeatedly about the kind of harms. In fact, the honourable gentleman himself has elucidated the kind of hate crimes that we're talking about here.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I do accept the substance of it, that certain words in the mouths of certain individuals are more likely to provoke a reaction. The question is, what's the test for a ban, and whether it has to be linked to public disorder and violence rather than simply offensive. I will come to that, but I do accept the premise that different people will provoke different reactions, sometimes according to who they are. The more simple point I'm making, or the narrower point, is that simply because he has particular wealth or power or particular position shouldn't affect the application of the same rules to him as they'd be applied to anybody else. But the threshold for banning is relatively high, and the power is relatively rarely used. The test, of course, is whether an individual would be their exclusion from the UK would be conducive to the public good. And in 2005, as has already been mentioned, that was extended to unacceptable behaviours, and that was spelt out. And it is worth just going through the way in which those behaviours were set out as a list of indicative factors in 2005. And there were 4 examples: fomenting, justifying or glorifying terrorist violence in furtherance of particular beliefs, seeking to provoke others to terrorist acts, fomenting other serious criminal activity, or fostering hatred which might lead to intercommunity violence in the UK. So the touchstone has always been words which provoke a response which has an element of disorder or violence in it. And so it is quite a high threshold. And examples have been given of some of the cases that have fallen under those provisions. They were given at the outset of the debate we've had. Now, there's no doubt, I think, that some of Donald Trump's comments have been offensive, shocking and disturbing. And I join with those that say they're not funny. They are repugnant. But they are just that, offensive, shocking and disturbing. And I don't think that in and of itself is enough to provoke a ban at this stage on the basis of what's been said so far. And I do go back to a principle that was set out by the European Court of Human Rights almost a quarter of a century ago in relation to a case where the Sunday Times and our government were slugging it out over Spycatcher. And the European Court said this: freedom of expression constitutes one of the essential foundations of a democratic society. It's applicable not only to information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive, but as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock or disturb. And the point the court was making is a really important one. Freedom of speech is not needed for speech which is welcome. You don't need a protection for speech which people treat with indifference. It is only relevant, it only bites when you get into the sphere of offensive speech, of shocking speech and disturbing speech. That is the whole point of the protection of free speech. And in this context, therefore, this speech, however offensive, shocking or disturbing, is in fact protected speech under what we conceive to be freedom of expression. Now, how does that translate? Well, of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner to express his views. I do agree with others that we should invite him to join us in our various constituencies and meet our constituents and members of various religious orders and faiths and communities. Actually, listening this afternoon, if he came here, he's obviously going to be really busy because he's going to several constituencies already. I would obviously invite him to mine, that's the end of a long list, to meet members of my constituency, because it is an incredibly diverse, multicultural community. And Donald Trump would see a UK very different to the picture that he painted. But should he be banned from entering the country on the basis of what he said? No, in my view, he shouldn't. He should be met with words far more powerful than his own. I do accept that this is a judgment call, and I respect those, not only this afternoon but on other occasions, who have expressed the contrary view that this is so close to the line that Donald Trump should in fact have action taken against him. But in the end, we should be guided by our own values and not those of Donald Trump. And our own values include a deep belief in freedom of speech and a deep belief in multi-faith and diverse societies where everyone feels secure and everyone feels respected. Thank you, Sir David.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir David, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also, at the outset, congratulate the Honourable Member for Newport West for the manner in which he has opened this debate, underlining the reasons why we are debating this issue, the importance that in this Parliament we attach to petitions, those supported by the public when they reach a threshold, so that that actually provides voice for the public in this House. And I think that that has been an important addition to our processes. Also, he was right to underline that shared sense of history between the United Kingdom and the United States, and the relationship that we have enjoyed between us over a considerable period of time. I think today's debate has also, as we are debating issues of freedom of speech, underlined the value and importance that this House places on that, and our ability for all different views, all different perspectives, to be able to argue those points clearly and effectively through the impassioned debate that we have had this afternoon. Before I respond to a number of the points raised during this debate, there are a few things I want to say at the outset. Britain is a successful, multiracial, multi-faith, multi-ethnic country. Our strength derives from that diversity. Life in our country is based on fundamental values that have been shaped by our history. They are supported and shared by the overwhelming majority of the population. The rule of law, democracy and individual liberty, freedom of expression, the mutual respect, tolerance and understanding of different faiths and beliefs. These make the foundation of our successful pluralistic nation. They unite us and help our society to thrive. I am proud that our country has so many vibrant, diverse communities constituting people of many faiths. And I celebrate the contribution made by British Muslims in this country in every sphere and in every walk of life. From those who fought in the trenches in World War I and fought fascism in World War II, to the businessmen, doctors, nurses, teachers, members of our armed services and members of this House, some of whom have made powerful and impassioned speeches this afternoon. And they are proud to be both British and Muslim without any contradiction. Yes, the threat from terrorism, both at home and abroad, is serious and it is real. We have seen the damaging and corrosive effects of extremism in our communities. But suggesting that the solution is to ban Muslims who have done nothing wrong ignores the fact that extremism affects all communities and hatred can come from any part of society. It ignores that Muslims are themselves far too often the targets of extremism and hatred, and that around the world many Muslims are killed by terrorism more than any other group. It also gives succor to the false view that Muslims cannot live a purposeful and fulfilled life in the West. Such assertions are fundamentally wrong, and as a country we could not be clearer in saying that. If we are to defeat the threats we face, we need to work together. We need everyone to play a part in stopping the poisonous spread of extremism and helping to protect vulnerable people from being brought towards its twisted ideology. It is that approach this government is seeking to foster, because we have seen the devastating impact radicalisation can have on individuals, families and communities, and because around the world more than 1.5 billion people of different nationalities, different outlooks and different political persuasions live peacefully practicing the Muslim faith. We must protect those who might be vulnerable to the poisonous and pernicious influence of radicalisation. Work with faith groups, community organisations, mosques across this country. All of us. And we continue to work in partnership with communities of all faith backgrounds to challenge those who spread hatred and intolerance. We must work with the overwhelming majority of people of this country who abhor the twisted narrative that has seduced some people in our country, and challenge those who use a warped version of faith to undermine our fundamental values. Now, many of the contributions from honourable and right honourable members this evening have focused on Donald Trump's call for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. The Prime Minister has said his comments are divisive, unhelpful and quite simply wrong. And I reiterate his view and profoundly disagree. And Mr. Trump's comments about the UK and London in particular, again, he could not be further from the truth. We should all be proud of London's status as one of the world's most diverse and tolerant cities, and of the police's role in keeping the entire city safe, working with communities to protect people from radicalisation. and I pay tribute to their tireless work. I will give way.
You mentioned the Prime Minister. Before he sits down, would he commend the Prime Minister's article in the Times today, in which he says the full integration? And the Prime Minister points out there are still a worryingly large number of Muslim women who do not speak English and who are not in the jobs market, and he wants to improve the situation. Would you commend the Prime Minister?
Well, I agree with the policy that the Prime Minister has rightly identified today in seeking to ensure that language is there to ensure that we help migrants to better participate and integrate in everyday life. That is the building block behind the policy that the Prime Minister has rightly identified, and how equally he has been prepared, I think, to look at some of those uncomfortable facts on the fact that 22% of British Muslim women in 2011 spoke poor or no English, compared to only 9% of British Muslim men. I will give way in just 1 second. And therefore, it is how we can target that support at those communities in the greatest need. And that's precisely why Louise Casey has been engaged as part of her work to go about that. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Does the Minister understand the point I was making earlier, that making this available for migrant people who don't speak English is different to saying that you must do it if you are a Muslim woman? And it shouldn't be aimed at a religion, it should be aimed at people who require the support.
Minister. Well, Sir David, this is not a Muslim-only scheme, and the point that I rightly make is that it is targeted on those communities that are most impacted, most affected, but equally why I make the point about the 22% number that I think the Prime Minister has rightly highlighted in the context of his speech today. Now, to address the issue of exclusion, the Home Secretary has the power to exclude a national from outside of the European Economic Area and refuse them entry to the UK if the Secretary of State has personally directed that the person's exclusion from the UK is conducive to the public good. This power is derived from the royal prerogative and is exercised by the Home Secretary in person. Exclusion decisions are not taken lightly or in isolation. The Home Secretary makes every decision on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the information available and a wide range of policy and operational factors. These factors include views from across government, including from the Department for Communities and Local Government and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The factors also include consideration of any interference with a person's human rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, such as their Article 10 right to respect for freedom of speech. Now, the Honourable Gentleman for Holborn and St Pancras has also, I think, underlined some of those factors, some of those elements that are part of the policy that we adopt in considering matters of exclusion. But the Home Secretary uses her power to exclude foreign nationals to protect us from national security threats, to protect us from radicalisers and hate preachers, and to protect us from people who seek to undermine our core British values. The policy is not targeted at any particular community. It is targeted at all those who advocate hatred or violence, regardless of their origins or belief. The Home Secretary has prevented neo-Nazis, Islamist extremists, and anti-Muslim hate preachers from entering the UK. She has excluded more preachers of hate than any other Home Secretary before her, 103 since 2010. And she will continue to use the exclusion power against those who seek to do us harm. Now, the government has a long-standing policy of not routinely commenting on those who are being considered for exclusion for sound legal reasons, and I will maintain that position this evening. But what I can say is that the US remains our most important bilateral partner. It is in the UK's interests that we engage all presidential candidates, Democratic and Republican, even though we may disagree profoundly on important issues. Where there are clear differences of opinion, the most effective way to influence our American partners is through a frank and open exchange of view, in taking on those arguments. And today's robust debate has, I think, provided a platform to do just that. I can see the Honourable Lady would like to catch my eye.
And the clock.
thank the Minister for letting me in again. I almost forgot what I was going to say. The Minister said that the Home Secretary has a policy position of not commenting on people that are being considered for the exclusion list. Does that mean that he can neither confirm nor deny that Donald Trump is being considered for that exclusion list?
Well, as I say, that we do not comment on individual matters, but I would say that what the Chancellor of the Exchequer has rightly underlined is saying that the best way to defeat nonsense like this is to engage in robust democratic debate and make it very clear that Donald Trump's views are not welcome. Now, we've also had comments in relation to Donald Trump's comments in respect of investment in Scotland. And clearly the appointment of Global Scots are, of course, a matter for the Scottish Government. The UK Government has never given Mr. Trump awards or appointments, honorary or otherwise. Mr. Trump has threatened to withhold investment in Scotland in response to the calls to ban him from the UK. Now, over the years, Mr. Trump has made a number of different statements about the scale of his investment in the UK and his willingness to maintain them. The UK is the #1 destination in Europe for inward investment, and the World Bank has ranked the UK as the 6th easiest place in the world to do business. So any organisation that makes promises about investment in the UK should live up to those promises. In conclusion, Sir David, we will not win the fight against extremism by demonising communities and tarring an entire religion because of the actions of a few. And we will not defeat the threats we face by acting in isolation. We will win the fight by working together, standing shoulder to shoulder with people of different faiths and different backgrounds, defending our values, and by showing that division, hatred and hostility have no place in our societies.
Mr. Paul Flynn.
I think the triumph of today is that we've had a debate that's been seen by many people outside, including the United States, and they've seen Parliament at its very best. We've had a diverse debate from a diverse Parliament. And I believe it reinforces the need for the Petitions Committee, a very young committee, an experimental committee that's going very slowly, building a role here. And this was a subject chosen not by any politicians, but by people who initiated and signed that view. I think we are all touched by the accounts by those of the Muslim faith about how devastating the threat from Donald Trump is. But I believe that
God, fucking idiot Chrome, yo.
Been put before the House this afternoon. It is a power that should be applied equally to everybody, whatever their wealth or power, and I think that is important. And I don't hold the view that because someone is a presidential candidate, that gives them any special category. They should be judged in the same way as everybody else on the basis of what they've actually said or done. Of course.
Sarah Woods.
Does the honourable gentleman agree, however, that the consequences of this kind of hate speech are greater when they come from high-profile individuals? And as I say, the heart of this debate is whether or not Donald Trump's presence in
of the Muslim faith about how devastating the threat from
matter for the Scottish Government. The UK Government has never given Mr. Trump awards or appointments, honorary or otherwise. Mr. Trump has threatened to withhold investment in Scotland in response to the calls to ban him from the UK. Now, over the years, Mr. Trump has made a number of different statements about the scale of his investment in the UK and his willingness to maintain them. The UK is the #1 destination in Europe for inward investment, and the World Bank has ranked the UK as the 6th easiest place in the world to do business. So any organisation that makes promises about investment in the UK should live up to those promises. In conclusion, Sir David, we will not win the fight against extremism by demonising communities and tarring an entire religion because of the actions of a few. And we will not defeat the threats we face by acting in isolation. We will win the fight by working together, standing shoulder to shoulder with people of different faiths and different backgrounds, defending our values, and by showing that division, hatred and hostility have no place in our societies.
Mr. Paul Flynn.
I think the triumph of today is that we've had a debate that's been seen by many people outside, including the United States, and they've seen Parliament at its very best. We've had a diverse debate from a diverse Parliament. And I believe it reinforces the need for the Petitions Committee, a very young committee, an experimental committee that's going very slowly, building a role here. And this was a subject chosen not by any politicians, but by people who initiated and signed that view. I think we are all touched by the accounts by those of the Muslim faith about how devastating the threat from Donald Trump is. But I believe that all that's said today will enhance the standing of this Parliament and will reinforce our relationship with our great ally of the United States.
The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 114003 and 114907 relating to the exclusion of Donald Trump from the UK. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you very much.
It's been seen by of the Muslim faith.
Order, order. The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 114003 and 114907 relating to the exclusion of Donald Trump from the UK. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
Of the Muslim faith.
Our position is not.
Threat from Donald Trump is. But I believe that all that's said today will enhance the standing of this Parliament and will reinforce our relationship with our great ally of the United States.
The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 114003 and 114907 relating to the exclusion of Donald Trump from the UK. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
As many as are of that position say jeez, I wouldn't have had a teacher that started talking about how Greece was one. Is there really different?
I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you very much.